Torah service. Over to you, Reba, for the drosha.
Thank you. Thank you, Marion. You know, I think a lot of people might find it curious that being a progressive Reform Jew, I choose to study and quote from all the different streams of Judaism. And particularly, I'm inspired by rabbis and sages of our century. And they represent different streams. As you know, I'm totally inspired by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, who extended far beyond the Jews to do an incredible series for the wider world community. I'm equally inspired by Rabbi, for example, in our progressive movement, Rabbi Joshua Weinberg, who we've all heard of. And equally, I'm inspired by Aish Torah and Chabad, and wonderful rabbis that speak their piece today, for example, like Rabbi Shraga Simmons. And I was thinking of what led me to this, and I thought maybe I should share with you something that very few people know to explain why I have such inordinate respect for the wisdom that's coming from all the streams of Judaism. And Judaism is a continuum. If you look at a continuum, at one side of the continuum might be the very, very ultra-Orthodox Haredi, who don't even believe in the state of Israel. And then there are many different ultra-Orthodox sects. Then that goes into the Orthodox, to the modern Orthodox, to the conservative, to the progressive, to the liberal, to the Rosicrucian, and then all the way down to the secular. So if we look at that whole continuum, I really believe that each has to be there. Each has a prophetic purpose in their own way of repairing the world of Tikkun Olam. And I just want to explain this, that I had a court case once against a magazine here for 5 years who defamed me, never mind why. But during that court case, a wonderful young attorney, Cecil Steinhauer, very orthodox, very, very orthodox Jew, was my attorney. And for some reason during the court case, it took several weeks in the magistrate's court here. It then moved to Bloemfontein, and Baruch Hashem, ultimately, after 5 years, we won. But noticing something about my thinking and behavior, during the court case, he arranged for me to meet with one of the greatest rabbis that have ever lived in this country. And I don't know if any of you have heard of him, Jacob, you might have, Rabbi Pfeiffer of blessed memory. I think he has a brother who might still be alive today. And Cecil arranged for him to teach me personally. Of course, Cecil or a man would have to always be with us, because in ultra-Orthodox tradition, you cannot be on your own with a female. And these meetings with Rabbi Pfeiffer was one of the most definitive turning points of my life. Cecil took me there as a motivational trainer. I was then training in the wider community only. And one day, the point came up of my being a practicing progressive Jew, or that's how I was thinking then. And sorry, this was in the 90s, I'm going nuts. And the question came up as isn't there only one form of Judaism, the authentic ultra-Orthodox? And I'll never forget the blessed words of Rabbi Pfeiffer. And as you saw him, when I met him, I actually saw this energy, this like halo that they talk about around him. And these were the words they said, and I've never forgotten them. He said, Judaism is like a stone that falls into the big pond of the world, and it falls into that massive pond. And please notice, he said, there are rings that go from out that stone, the rings, there are concentric rings that go right to the edge of the pond. And he said each circle, as a result of that stone falling into the pond, has a place. Yes, perhaps there is a place as well where the first circle is very orthodox. But he said without those other circles going to the very end of that pond, and that includes even secular Judaism, the pond would remain very still and nothing would happen. So in memory of a great rabbi who ultimately, very shortly after that, before we could continue our lessons, went to the game reserve, he was totally in love with nature and he was killed there in a car smash. So in his memory, I thought I'd like to share those words with you because they inspired me. And that really leads us to talking about Bo and where I started last night. As I said, really, we are a storytelling nation. When it came to that definitive moment when the Jews are free to begin their real move to freedom, Moses speaks about our duties of remembering and reciting this to generation after generation. And as I said last night, this has inspired the entire Western world. Now, of course, the world, we have to repair the world. That is our purpose. Without a purpose, what is the point of getting up in the morning? And whether you're repairing the world is to bring up a child to succeed and understand the laws of Judaism, to do unto others as you wish them to do unto you, that's a beautiful purpose. The purposes are in many different areas. It's in someone you meet in the street and how you speak to them. It's in our mitzvah on a Thursday. But it's also in changing the precepts, the understanding of the world. And when you look at the world today, look how imperfect it still is. Look at the oppression, the hatred, the torture that's going on in states all around us that we can, like Kazakhstan, which is being reported now. The military government won't give up. That is the pharaoh of our day. And it's amazing that each stream of Judaism has a different arena, that they've devoted themselves to. And so it is so important that we talk up against and encourage the people, not only of Kazakhstan, what's happening on our borders in Africa against terrorism, extremism. That is all part of the story of Egypt. The extremism of Muslim against Muslim with the different types of expressions is horrible. And we as Jews must never, ever denigrate any other stream of Judaism. We must say, yes, we approach it differently. We understand that. We are all fighting for different aspects of Tikkun Olam. The progressive reform movement today is concentrating on Israel because Israel is not perfect. Come on, all of us, the whole country the whole world is working towards perfection. We're a long way from it. And the progressive prophetic duty of all these so-called, and I don't like that term, non-Orthodox, because they are exactly magnificent expressions of Judaism, as the late great Rabbi Fulfer intimated. Progressive Judaism fights in Israel for pluralism, for tolerance amongst our own Jewish religions. They already have, Baruch Hashem, total respect for difference between different religions. But the Jews have still got to learn, the very ultra-Orthodox extremists in Israel, to respect every expression of Judaism, So that's our task. When you look at the task of the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, that was to spread the Jewish ethic perhaps to the whole world. And so also I'm inspired by leadership today in another Chabad movement, Aish, or Orthodox movement, not Chabad, I should say, by Rabbi Shraga Simons, who brought to this narrative that we started last night of storytelling to ensure that each generation is educated. So the most important aspect in terms of this parasha is to show us that it is our duty to educate the next generation. It is our duty to keep the magnificent stories of freedom alive, all coming back and based on our story of freedom from Egypt. It is essential we keep the story of Mandela and our freedom fighters alive. It is essential that the States keeps the story of Abraham Lincoln and their struggle alive against the people, be it in South Africa, who are trying to destroy that legacy, who are trying to rule and divide and bring hatred again, or the States where this extreme nationalism and hatred and difference between white and black, there is no difference. We're human beings. All of those differences have no part in the eyes of Hashem, or in Israel, where they still, and we're slowly getting there, recognizing not only all forms of religious Judaism, but I'm going to go further, civil marriage, recognizing the secular. And just to show you how the very history of our people, how Torah is in the very marrow of the most secular Jew in Israel. I can only tell you about Ben Gurion, who wasn't religious at all, but his entire statement on the founding fathers of Israel is based on Torah. So we need all these different expressions. We dare not only say mine is the only way, because of course that was led to the destructions of our temple. So let me move on to yet another theme. And this I attribute now to Rabbi Shraga Simons of Aish. What makes a great Jewish leader? What is the difference between Moses and Pharaoh? What is the difference between a just political leader today or a just religious leader today? It is the same difference. Nothing changes. The difference between Moses and Pharaoh as leaders is exemplary of the difference today between those leaderships, be they religious or political, who want to power, control, and destroy anyone who doesn't agree with them. And you'll see it right across the religious and political spectrum. And Moses, the leader, who really wants the good of his people. It's quite amazing. Just watch the news. It's being played out in front of your eyes, the same story today. And especially in Kazakhstan and other places where you have a military, and in places where the leadership became democratic and now has been tempted to go back to impose rules, regulations for their good and not the good of the people. So, what is the great difference between Moses and Pharaoh? What makes a great Jewish leader? So, let's first look at Pharaoh. God sends one plague after the other. And even though it is hurting his own people, he refuses to let the Jews go. Unbelievable. Even his people begged him, Pharaoh, let these people go. He wasn't convinced. Because for Pharaoh, it was not merely a pragmatic issue of saving his country. It had become a personal battle between him, Moses, and this other god. His ego was involved. And that we can see in our own era today. How could he, Pharaoh, considered a god himself, be upstaged by God and those lower class Jewish slaves? So Pharaoh's ego took over beyond any point of rationality. Folks, does it ring a bell to us in South Africa? I don't have to mention which president I'm talking about. There is no rationality at all. He is willing to completely destroy his country and even himself rather than admit defeat. But look what happens as the ship sinks. And I read it to you. Pharaoh calls on his people, you make the national sacrifice. In the meantime, what many people don't realize, that Pharaoh was also the firstborn of his family. And so you heard me say, take note. He begs Moses to pray to God, bless me that I shouldn't be amongst the other firstborns. It's always him first, never his people. He's in a panic. He's backed into a corner. And the Midrash tells us that, and we heard him even say it, he then blames his servants and the survivors for the whole debacle, and he has them killed. He was on the edge with nothing to lose. He'll try anything, including negotiating with Moses and God. At least bless me, I read that to you. However, very tragically, because it involves the loss of lives, this great leader, the Egyptian god, is completely humiliated. Tragically, I don't want to see people humiliated, but what Judaism is telling us, and remember that Torah is a book of laws, not a religious theology. It's a book of laws as well, or mainly. And it's warning us, if you abuse as a leader your people, if you take for yourself, if you kill people so that you can stay in power, which is happening here, happening in other countries in the world, we know it, you will be humiliated. You have to be held accountable. The world has to hold people accountable. Even then, I would say hold them accountable in a compassionate way. I don't desire their death, but I do desire they are accountable and pay the price for what they've brought on their own people. So, now funny enough, the Talmud actually describes this part when Pharaoh is vanquished, and they describe it metaphorically, and they refer to him as a midget, just 2 feet tall, when he was a very tall man. So let us just continue this hymn. So let me just read this to you. The Torah specifies an unusual mitzvah that applies to a Jewish king. However, it can refer to everyone in terms of knowing the laws and respecting the dignity of your subjects, and that every man is equal and on a par with you. So it shall be for him, and we've heard this before, he's got to write his own Torah. But basically what that means, it's telling leadership that his heart must never become haughtier over his fellow countrymen. We told that in Deuteronomy. The precise difference between Pharaoh and Moses is that a person's ability to ignore reality and even destroy his own country and world is tested most when his ego is at stake. The more power, the more likely the danger. And we know that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's very difficult for a world leader to admit I'm wrong. And that brings us back to a modern day motivational trainer, Covey, who said, You've got to be able to see, to grow in terms of God's image, to grow in the way we are educated in Judaism. We are not taught a religion, we are educated to understand how to achieve the best of our potential and those around us. And it says you've got to be able to say, I'm sorry, and admit you made a mistake. Any great leader who can do that is then forgiven and even worshipped by their followers. But of course, the Pharaoh type characters that we see in the world today, the populists, the extremists, could never, they've beyond their mind being changed to even think they're wrong. So when you admit you're wrong, there is a force greater than me that I can't control. Pharaoh, as many leaders today, both in the Western world and particularly in the sad world of extremism, in many Russian, in many Arab countries, Pharaoh cannot acknowledge the supremacy of God. Whereas a true Jewish leader or any good leader today is by definition subjected to the will of God. What do we mean by that? It's subjected to the laws of Torah, that they believe another human being's life is worth everything. If you save one life, you save the world. They believe in respecting every religion, no matter what it is. They believe in respecting the atheist, the agnostic, provided they act in such a way which shows respect, care, and love for the other who has not, or who's being threatened. King David writes in Psalms this great secret of Moses, which is humility. Zivchei Elohim Ruach Nishbara. The sacrifice the Almighty wants is a humble spirit. King David is telling us that the battle of life is to acknowledge God and appreciate all he does for humanity. In other words, to appreciate the gift and the ability we have to repair the world. Arrogance or humility, which will a leader choose? So the Talmud likens arrogance to the worship of idols. Well, of course it is. You're worshiping yourself, you're worshiping money, you're worshiping power, you're worshiping I don't know what. And pushing away the other. When we push away the other, when we don't care about the other, I don't care which country it is, we must raise our voices, we push away Hashem. So let me conclude. The Torah leader will resist honor. In fact, you remember that Moses protests to God in the burning bush, what am I that I should lead the Jews out of Egypt? And so, may I say, wouldn't the world be a different place today? And it's on its way there, don't worry. If all leaders would be held accountable, be prepared to make mistakes, as we all do. In Torah, there is not the greatest prophet, Moses, and all our prophets, male and female, who did not make a mistake. But they understood, they apologized. King David sat in sackcloth and ashes for months to atone for the terrible sin of having a soldier killed so that he could take his wife. But we're humans, and humans are divine. What do I mean by that? In that we can overcome the mistakes and not make them again, and get to a higher level of closeness, of being with Hashem, and as Hashem's partners, making the world a really beautiful and fascinating place it is. The truth is people get the leaders they deserve, but you see the people today are fighting back. That is why it's not an era where there is a great charismatic leader saying what's right. It is time for the people to fight back and to get the right leaders, that now they understand they must protest on behalf of cruelty to nature and the animal world, on behalf of cruelty to the immigrant, on behalf of the beggar, the orphan, the poor, the dispossessed. May it be the time that we, the people, demand integrity of our government leaders, because we cannot let it slide. We have too much of the great mitzvah and honor of being a light to the nations and sharing the magnificence that we can have, provided we learn the respect of the other that is inherent in our Jewish Torah. Shabbat Shalom.